Hello, my name is Brant Hunt. We're trying for the third time today. This particular book I'm going to be reading is The Shadow of the Third Century. This is chapter 6 by Alvin Kuhn. The chapter 6 the title is called Milk for Babes. And I wanted to share a quote since I had actually was doing that and I found out there's another issue with this issue with the recording. So we're going to read something here and get to it. Bear with me as I get the pages. Here's a couple of quotes from what Alvin is sharing here. One is actually called, the gentleman's name was H. Milman, Milman. He wrote a book called The History of Christianity, and page 461. This is his quote. The tyranny exercised over the human mind in the matter, in the name, sorry, not the matter, but in the name of religion. Okay. The next quote is from Alfred Loisy, Loisy. His book is called The Birth of the Christian Religion. This is from page 12. From the very beginning, it was a tradition of faith. In all strictness, the Gospels are not historical documents. They are catechisms for use in common worship. That and no other is the content they announce. That and no other is the quality they claim. So that's his quote. So we're going to be reading chapter 6 here. And let's get into the book here. Appreciate you being here. So like I said, the title is called Milk for Babes. We'll see how far we can get through this book. Try not to make it too long today. It would seem as if the subject of esotericism could be dismissed at this point. As a matter of fact, it has by no means been adequately dealt with in its vital connection with the catastrophic deterioration of Christianity into Christianism. The whole chance to understand the development of Christianity lies in a complete grasp of the fundamental relation of esotericism to culture in general. As Christianity was the most signal and massive movement away from esotericism to the wide dissemination of a popular faith. All the elements of true comprehension of the course it took are deeply buried from sight into the depths and intrigues of the situation. The probing for historical truth must be made. Esotericism has been seen an ineludible necessity and a perfectly natural condition inherited in the evolution of human genius. Based on the inevitable differences of capability and attainment consisting between highly and less highly evolved mortals. It is an earned privilege of those who have developed high capacities and open knowing faculties to acquire wisdom and enjoy it, the satisfaction and boons. These blessings are not the HAP, of those who have not yet paid the price to possess them. Even this simple rationalization has been made a matter of unacceptability by the courts of Christian hereticism, for it became almost a basic conviction of the early fanatic devotees of the cult that the rudest and crookedest members of society were equally entitled to the largeness of divine favor and the gift of intelligence to understand the mysteries of faith with the studious and the philosophical. Pretty strong statement there, he says, of the cult, that the rudest and cruelest members of society. Okay, that tells you what this is all about, folks. The Gospels appear to exalt the lowly to the disparagement of the wise and cultural. to tear down the mighty from their seats and exalt them at a low degree became a kind of a shibboleth of the new moment, as ignoramus with God in his heart could excel the philosopher. But it was a mistaken presumption, and it led to disaster. The obvious difference in intelligence quantum cannot be ignored. Dearly has the world paid for Christianity's exaltation of ignorance in those formal days. Christianity made a momentous choice in its second and third century, and that choice was to throw in its lot with the lowest and meanest ranks of society in the world of the day, as against the elite and intelligentsia, against instruction, philosophy, and the cultus of higher learning. Its history is a long and horrifying record of the result of that choice. All Occidental event since then has been a dark shadow hearing the shape of the structure of unwisdom that prompted and executed that choice. Not only did it deliberately make that choice, but it has endorsed and sanctified it. In fact, indeed, glorify in it ever since. Christianity, its proponents said, is so much the nobler religion just because it ministers to the humble, the simple, and the unlearned, while the esoteric cults of the pagans reached only a few intellectuals. This claim and its implication must now be the theme of many pages. Now, just to see, I want you to hear this. What he says, they consider themselves nobler. This was a noble religion, but it's for to the humble, the simple, and unlearned. No, it was in order to trick them, folks. It was to fool them. And the sad part, simply today, it's not just the unlearned. It's a lot of the people who think they learn. You see, this claim and its implications must now be the theme of many pages. No better place to begin could be found than in a passage from Christians, that is homily number 3 on 1 Corinthians 1:10. He glories in the ignorance of the 12 apostles, so often lauded as plain fishermen, and the most glorious for it. Quote, rather let us charge the apostles with want of learning, for this same charge is praised. And when they say that the apostles were rude, let us follow up the remark and say that they were also untaught and unlettered and poor and vile and stupid and obscure. It is not slander on the apostles to say so, but it is even a glory that, being such, they should have outshone the whole world. End quote. Facing the sobering fact that almost certainly these 12 personages were simply dramatic allegorical personifications of the 12 signs of the zodiac. You heard me. The 12 signs of the zodiac. Disciples, there were no disciples, folks. This was the 12 signs of the zodiac. Themselves being symbols of the 12 powers of divinity to be unfolded as the adjuncts and essenes of the Christ's nature itself. As many great sages declared them to be, and that they were never living men at all, but assuming their factual existence for the sake of argument, we may agree with him of the golden mouth, that is the meaning of Christendom, that the 12 were ignorant, simple fishermen, but we are not so ready to agree with him that they outshone the whole world. This is a fine sample of what an early Christian, in the exuberance of his hypnotic faith, could bring himself to imagine and assert. And what he's talking about, this is a church father here. His name was John, I think it's John Chrysostom, so Chrysostom. That was required reading when you took a early church history class or patristics. Patristics simply means early history, church history. It changed that there comes to hand in this moment a passage from no less a responsible historian than Gegenberg, who in his fine history of Christianity has this to say in almost direct contradiction to the rhapsody of exaltations of Christendom's golden mouth, but fanciful eloquence about the 12 halo fishermen. Dealing with the legends about the work of the apostles in different countries, he writes at page 61, quote, but it is to be feared that not one of them is true, and in fact, apart from the early chapters of the Acts of the Apostles, which we possess only in the form of a second-hand adaptation of the first edition, there exists no information really worthy of credence about the life and work of the immediate apostles of Jesus. Their immediate and direct influence upon the history of Christianity is practically negligible. End quote. Other writers comment on the odd fact that following the commissioning of the 12 disciples and then the 70 by Jesus to go forth and evangelize the whole world, either they met with no success worthy of record or no record of it was made. In either case, the score marks another total miscalculation of a practical move and its expected results to be tallied against the reputed omniscience of the cosmic Logos in the person of the Nazarenes. So far as history knows, the great command of the Son of God to the 82 men to go into all the world and preach the gospel that unknown to them was already a common esoteric possession of all nations and already prescribed in sacred books the world over, was entirely a futile gesture, making at no time enough impact on the life of the times to win a single notion from any historian. Yet every pious Christian has in his imagination pictured these doughty and sanctified missionaries as valiant pioneers of the first true world faith, haranguing multitudes on hills and lakesides and swaying them to conversion by thousands. Incidentally, there are scholars, not a few, within the pale of the Orthodox Christianity who regard even the Acts of Apostles as a spurious work. So, in other words, it was not even seen, even in the Orthodox Christianity, as being a book worthy of being published, supposedly. That is, if you look at it literally. We have the word of such a fine historian as Gingelberg that the disciples were, it must be remembered, Jews in mean circumstances and without culture. And Gingenberg considers how extremely unlikely it would be for anyone born and reared a Jew, even an ignorant fisherman, to regard it as less than actual blasphemy against the deity to conceive of the divine infinity. Divine infinite. Quote, which he dared not name lest he should seem to be putting strict restrictions upon it, as being enclosed within the narrow confines of a human body. End quote. If Jewish reverence for the majesty of deity was so great that it was regarded as gross impiety to alter the ineffable name of Yahweh, how unthinkable would it have been for one to believe that this cosmic deity would come to earth in the humble flesh of a mortal creature? Gegenberg suggests that had anyone come and told the 12 that Jesus was the incarnation of God, at first they would have failed to catch his meaning, then they would have cried out against it with horror. But he says they could have made sense of what Paul told them concerning Jesus, i.e., that he had been a celestial man and even the incarnation of the Spirit. That is the Pneuma, which is Pneuma, Pneuma, which is Spirit of God. Yet one has to wonder, what would such fishermen know about the Pneuma of God? What were they likely to know about the literal method of allegory, myth, and drama? In committing itself wholly to the religiousizing of the untutored masses, Christianity inevitably and irretrievably aligned itself with the interests of ignorant pietism and sheer faith as against those of intelligence and philosophical reflection. As said, the gap between these two notes, NODES, human consciousness, or two worlds of conscious dimension, is of immense width and yawning impassibility. The choice pledged the movement to concentrate all its force upon the glorification of pure religion, that is, faith, as against bookish intelligence or study and its fruits in understanding. What he's saying here, simply, folks, is that everything's based upon faith or belief. But if you use your rational mind, it doesn't make any sense. If you look at it literally, it doesn't make sense. And I want to point out something. That's where most people do see that, but they don't realize something else. They miss the esoteric perspective here. You see, they may have gotten the first part right, but the second part they missed. This is critical for people to understand. if you want to um, ascend in this lifetime, or if you want to be enlightened in this lifetime. These are buzzwords. I don't know, or have a experience that changes your life that is real. You see, if stress on the intellect and its findings was to be reduced to the vanishing point, then all emphasis had to be increased proportionally on sheer pietism and emotional element. Fervor would come to be the badge of sanctified membership in the body of Christ. Zeal carried to a fantastic and fanatic lengths would be the characteristics or character mark of the early apostolic and evangelical Christendom, and such is what history records. So at one fell swoop, Christianity sank down to make itself at home on the level of the lowest class of the Roman Empire. At one stroke, it set its destiny by an alliance with the undergrads of humanity. For a time, indeed, while still motivated by much respect for the pagan policies and principles, it makes a sincere effort to retain in its message a distinction between the esoteric teachings for the wiser and the exoteric form a parabolic instruction for the less capable. You see? An enlightened view of this effort is gained from what Fisher tells us in his work already cited in page 360. Quote, among the Jews in the latter period of their history, prior to the birth of Christ, many synonyms works were composed. This was true mostly of the Alexandrians, but not of them exclusively. At first and often this was a literal device, no deceit being intended. It early led, however, to intentional fraud. The same practice passed into the Christian circles where Judaism and Judaizers' influences were potent. A distinction was made between esoteric and exoteric doctrine, between what the enlightened may hold and what it was expedient to impart to the people, a distinction which has its prime source in the Alexandria philosophy. Under the cover of this false ethical principle, writings were fabricated like the Sibylline oracles and the pseudo-Clement homilies, but pious frauds of this nature were possible only where there was a defective sense of obligation to truth. They are utterly repugnant to a sound Christian feeling, nor is there ground for the supposing that in the ancient church, generally speaking, they were regarded otherwise than at its present. Speaking of one of the fabricated books, that is ACTA, Acta Paulé el Delay, Tertullian says that in Asia, the presbytery who composed that writing, as if it were arguing Paul's name from his own store, after being convicted and confessing that he had done it from love of Paul, was removed from office. This act is indicative of the judgment that would be formed of such imposture by Christians generally at the time. History has found it cannot be so lenient in its judgment on the vast body of pious frauds perpetrated by the early Christians as Fisher is here. If the presbytery fabricated acts of Paul and Othello for the love of Paul, likewise the inquisitors murdered Protestants later for the love of Christ. This should illustrate for us, and we need this illustration, what love can do when not instructed by intelligence. Fisher's statement gives us the first evidence introduced here that the religious movement, which was so soon to scorn all esoteric itself, started out with the institution of distinction between the milk for babes and the meat for strong men. This singular fact is so generally unknown that testimony to support it must be presented. We have the strong direct statements of Origen himself that the mysteries were perpetrated in the Christian church as they had been in the pagan societies. In his Contra Celsum, Celsum book, Levii, he says, quote, but that there should be certain doctrines not made known to the multitude, which are revealed after the exoteric ones have been taught. It is not a peculiarity of Christianity alone, but also philosophical systems in which certain truths are esoteric and others are esoteric, end quote. The point to be noted is that a exoteric and esoteric differential was a peculiarity of Christian practice, according to Origen. Now to the exorbitations of Saint Cyril, Cyril, of Jerusalem in the fourth catechism lecture, in which he speaks of the esoteric doctrine thus, quote, to hear the gospel is indeed permitted to all, but the glory of the gospel is set apart for Christ's genuine disciples only. The Lord spake in parables to those who would not hear, but privately explained these parables and similitudes, that is, i.e., that is the analogs and the nature symbol to his disciples. The fullness of the glory belongs to those who are already illuminated. The blindness is that of unbelievers. This mysteries the church communicates to him who is going out of the class of catechumens, nor is it customary to reveal them to the heathen, for we do not tell to any heathen the secret mysteries concerning the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost. Neither do we openly and plainly speak of them among the catechumens, but only in its covert and secret manner, so that the faithful who know them may not be injured. One can be pardoned a smile of gracious indulgence to an overweening presumption on the part of the sainted Cyril, when he says that they, the Christians, do not communicate the mystery of the great doctrine of the Trinity to a heathen. If one happens to be aware that it was from a heathen philosopher himself that the church drew its doctrines of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, it was imparted by the Neoplatonic philosopher Clonius to Augustine, his pupil, being based on his three fundamental hypotheses, end quote. And St. Basil the Great, in speaking of certain rites of the church appertaining to baptism and the Eucharist, which he claims were received by tradition from the apostles, says expressly that they were guarded in reverent silence and dignity from all intrusions of the profane and uninitiated, so that they would not fall into contempt. There must be enter into the chronicle the gist of the statement made by Clement of Alexandria in his Stromato, Stromato, M-A-T-A, these books. Here he speaks of the necessity of hiding in a mystery the wisdom which the Son of God had brought, or the hindrance which there were in his day to his writings about the wisdom. Lest he should cast pearls before swine, of the reason why the Christian mysteries were celebrated at night, like the pagans' ones, because then the soul, released from the dominion of the senses, turns in upon itself and has a truer intelligence of the mystery of God, hid for ages under allegory and prophecy, but as now revealed by Jesus Christ, and which St. Paul would only speak of among such as the perfect, giving milk to babes and meat to men of understanding, and those mysteries as enter upon through the tradition of the Lord, i.e., by means of baptism and divine illumination. From many authorities, it is demonstrated that there were three general classes of Christians, graded according to their proven development. In the primitive church, visit the catechumens and the competents and the illuminates, or mystics, or the faithful. The names indicate the order of rank. We cannot escape the observation for its great significance that the name mystic, given to those considered illuminated, was taken directly from the designation of the initiate of the Orphic, O-R-P-H-I-C, and Eleusinian mysteries of the pagans. What Clemens says receives confirmation from a statement in Lundy's Monumental Christianity, page 82, which is very germane. Quote, but for all that there was something mysterious about the Eucharist as related to the incarnation and the resurrection of Christ and his union with the church, which could only be appreciated by the highest exercise of faith, and therefore None but the faithful were admitted to the high privilege of its participation. And I would agree with that. I remember reading things of this nature that you are not allowed in, the, in this particular, you are not allowed in these services unless you've gone through other what I call services before and that you could be trusted. That's the truth. They talked about this in patristics that unless you really actually had something that basically took place in your life, you were not going to be accepted in this group. They were almost as though there were guards or people there to make sure that there would not be the wrong people into these particular um, mysterious meetings. No explanation of it is given by the fathers. No explanation appears on the monuments. It still remains where the Lord left it, a profound mystery, like the union of soul and body, spirit and matter, God and man, Christ and church. If there are those who linger under the impression that the sacramental offices of the Christian fellowship were from the start and ever since open to every humble member of his laity, here's the evidence that the truth was otherwise, and it is part of the voluminous and authoritarian body of evidence that the religion began in the full spirit and practice of esoteric understanding. The influences that led to the discontinuance of the practice are those same that brought in the entire deterioration of the original spiritual power of the movement. In Massey, that is in Gerald Massey, brochure on Paul the Gnostic, opponent of Peter, there is a statement eminently worthy of reproduction. Quote, at the same time as Irenaeus tells us, the Gnostics, of whom Marcion was one, charged the apostles with hypocrisy because they framed their doctrine according to the capacity of their hearers. They fabbling blind things for the blind according to their blindness, the dull according to their dullness, for those in error according to their errors. End quote. At first sight, this passage would seem to reverse the side of positions of the contending parties in the controversy. Here is the Gnostics, who certainly stood for the method of true esotericism, this being indeed almost the foundation of their system, who charged the non-esoteric apostolic Christians with dividing the word according to the capacity of those to whom it is preached. In other words, practicing esotericism. But the wording of Irenaeus' passage makes it clear that it was not a genuine esoteric techniques that the Gnostics were accusing the Christians of practicing, but a disingenuous one, as it were, deliberately departing from the truth to give simple minds something concrete instead of a mystery to be grasped spiritually. This is exactly what Celsus, Celsus, and other cultural critics of early Christianity record of the practices of the church. The leaders and instructors imparted to their catechumens, that's right, and ignorant laity every sort of plausible or miraculous concoction of fancy to explain the mystery of their faith. When they found their prodigies sitting in stoic incomprehension of a attempt elucidation of Trinitarianism, the Eutychus, or other aspects of the imparted theology, a little later and practically ever since, it is clear that there are those who essay the role of instructions or expositors were as dark about the inner meaning of those dogmas as their pupils. They're just as blind as they were, the blind leading the blind, so to speak. My 10. When the blind attempt to lead the blind, the ditch by the side of the theological road will have many visitors or inmates. Yeah, still is today. Look at the teachers who preach today. Look at them. Look at the people. Look at the people who are followed immensely by these people. You see them everywhere. They have nothing to do with esoteric Christianity, but they have droves of people who give them money and fame, which has nothing to do with esotericism of Christianity. Period. Perhaps not too much blame is to be attached to the resort to fabrication in the face of solid incapacity for the appropriate appreciation of subtle aspects of spiritual experience or cosmology. It is the fact of such fabrication that needs a recording simply for the truth itself. The elucidation can come afterwards. It is the common temptation confronting the priesthood, indeed all higher instruction anywhere in the cultural field, when low capacity is to be enlightened to find simplification and some sort of easier explanation, end quote. Yeah, I remember we just talked about the buying of church offices. This is long ago. I mean, this is long after this has happened in the 300s. This is taking place probably in the 1500s. So you're talking about from 3 to 5, 15. You're talking about 1,200 years later. And now the offices, church offices, anybody who wants to be a important person in church, they buy office. They pay for that position. That's how corrupt it gotten, folks. You see, and there were many other positions that who couldn't explain Latin. They would read Latin, but they couldn't explain what they read. They made it such a mysterious type of thing to the point that no one even knew what they were doing in the Latin services. You see, and even the monks that did this, the priests and monks, whatever you want to call it, guess what? They didn't know any better neither. They were just as lost as the other was. But the fact is, the tendency was carried on to such a degree of recklessness that Cellius exclaims at one place that even nursemaids would blush to be called telling such lurid falsehoods and fairy tales to their infantile charges. The rule that apparently governed the degree of errant proficiency with which the treasures of truth were thus strewn around was, the duller the catechumens, the more weird and fantastic the explanation. One does not need to look beyond the present epoch to find a simpler procedure in things religious. It is a common phenomenon of all times. Christians should be the last people to snarl at esotericism, for their early leaders used the method and in ways that were decidedly advantageous to the interests of the faith. I'll say that again. Christians should be the last people to snarl at esotericism, for their early leaders used the method and in ways that were decidedly advantageous to the interests of the faith. But what can be more revealing and more authoritarian, because written in the secret and in confidence, than the statement in a letter written by St. Gregory de Nazareth to his friend and confidant, St. Jerome, in which he said, quote, "Nothing can impose better on a people than verbiage. The less they understand, the more they admire." And it's the same way today with the New Age movement. Same bullshit. It's amazing. It is. It is amazing. People do not use their noggin, don't use logic. They don't think for themselves. That's what it means, folks. It just continue on. Continue on with this quote. Our fathers and doctors have often said not what they thought, but that to which circumstance and necessity forced them. End quote. Now, St. Jerome was a guy in Jerusalem. And what I knew about him, he was a pretty big major factor in the late 300s and 400s. He also wrote his notes, I think, on the Bible. So it was a record who had some influence on St. Augustine. Ambrose also had influence also on um, Augustine. The saintly bishop's own words relieve us of the necessity of charging the hierarchy of early Christianity with deliberate forcing fabrications designed to impose on the gullibility and rather credulity of their simple followers. This idea of historical fact, however, should be remembered when one reads of the eternal boast of Christianity that its consummated merit and glory was that it gave truth to the humble and lowly. This work is aimed to show that the sort of truth it imparted to the ignorant, instead of blessing them, bound them in the chains of tenfold deeper dungeons of ignorance and superstitions. My, oh my. This is a hint in the Clement Homilies, a work that brings to light some of the salient features in the opposition of the Petrine party to Paul. Peter's faction held Paul almost as a Gnostic and hence a heretic enemy of the true evangelistic faith, that even accused Paul of having been converted by a false Christ, i.e., the mystic Christ of his Damascus vision, and not the man Jesus. So far did this obsession creep into their minds that they even ventured to suggest that he was the Antichrist, the arch enemy of the crucified, and that he would be the author of some great heresy expected to arise in the future. Peter is said, therefore, to have declared that Christ instructed the disciples not to publish the one true and genuine gospel for the present, because the false teacher must arise who would publicly proclaim the false gospel of the Antichrist. That was the Christ of the Gnostics, you see. The true gospel was confessedly, quote, held and reserved to be secretly transmuted for the rectification of future heresies, end quote. Massey says they knew well enough what had to come if Paul's preaching proclaimed in his epistles were wickedly broadcast. It was Paul whom they had reason to fear. Justin Martyr never once mentioned this real founder of Christianity, never once refers to the writings of Paul. Strangest of all things is that the book of Acts, which is mainly a history of Paul, should contain no account of his martyrdom or death in Rome. Paul's writings seem to have been withheld for a whole century after his death. There is intimidated here a whole intimate sorry there is intimate here in holding back of the true gospel from the world at large. It shows the prevalence of the esoteric motives in early Christianity. Even in connection with the Gospels themselves, there is evidence of the operations of the esoteric principle early in the life of the new faith. It is found in such an item of data as that which comes directly from Jerome himself, the translator of the Vulgate, into Latin. That's what he's known for. He translated the Vulgate into the Latin. Writing to the Bishop Chromatius and Heliodorus, he complains that, quote, a difficult work is enjoined, since this translation has been commanded me by your Felicitas, which St. Matthew himself, the apostle and evangelist, did not wish to be openly written, for it had not been secret. He, that is Matthew, would not have added to the evangel that which he gave for was his, but he made up this book, sealed up in the Hebrew characters, which he put forth in such a way that the book, written in Hebrew letters and by the hand of himself, might be possessed by the men most religiously, who also in the course of time received from those who preceded them. But this very book they never gave to anyone to be transcribed, and its text was related, some one way and some another. St. Jerome, Victor, that is 5445, Sod, S-O-D, the son of the man, page 44, end quote. What is this but the expression of reluctance on the part of a student of esoteric things to give out to the public literature hitherto always held inviolable esoteric? There is more than a hint here, too, that such gospels as Matthew's had not been recently written, but had been handed down from generation to generation of men cherishing these writings as secret manuals of truth not to be given to the multitude. Lundy, L-U-N-D-Y, records that the secret discipline of the primitive church seemed to have formulated 2 or 3 classes of catechumens in different stages of advancement and fitness for admission into the Christian assembly. Origen thus testifies, he says, quote, the Christians having previously, as far as possible, tested the souls of those who wished to become their hearers, and having previously instructed them in private, when before entering the community they appeared to have sufficiently in evidence their desire towards a virtuous life, introduced them then and not before, privately forming one class of those who are beginners and are receiving admission, but who have not yet attained the mark of complete purification, and another class of those who have manifested to the best of their ability their intentions to desire no other things than are approved by Christians, and among these there are certain persons appointed to make inquiries regarding the lives and behavior of those who join them, in order that they may prevent those who commit infamous acts from coming into their public assemblies, while those of a different character they receive with their whole heart, in order that they may daily make them better. And this is their method of procedure, both with those who are sinners, and especially with those who led dissolute lives, whom they excluded, from their communities. End quote. And Lundy goes on to say that in Tertullian day, somewhat later than Origen's, the quote, the heretics, meaning the general run of pagan and semi-Christian sectarians, made no such distinction between a catechumens and a believer. For he says they all had access alike. They hear alike, they pray alike, even heathens. If any such happen to come among them, that which is holy, they will cast to the dogs and their pearls. Only false ones they will fling to the swine. Simplicity they will have to consist in the overthrowing of discipline, attention to which on our part they call finery. End quote. That was from Tertullian Practices, page 41, Praees, I should say. There's hardly a greater anomaly in history than to find Christians accusing pagans of disregarding, while they held fast to, the program of esoteric systematicism. For by and large, it was the pagans who held to it and the Christians who disregarded it. You hear that? You hear what he's saying here? My, oh my. It could have been a time and a particular group in which the rigid distinctions holding generally in pagan esoteric practice had been relaxed, while the Christians were still working in tradition of careful graduation. Then Lundy points us to a document called the Apostolic Constitutions, in which he laid down the catalog of doctrinal items in which the catechumens were to be instructed. A glance at this list reveals at once that the instructions imparted to their candidates ran deeply in the channels of what would have to be called the esoteric studies in theology, including such mysteries as those of the knowledge of the unbegotten God, his only begotten Son, and the Holy Ghost, the order of creation, the course of providence, and the dispensations of God's law, the divine motive in world creation, and why man was appointed to be a citizen therein, that is the anthropology, the nature and constitution of man, God's punishment of the wicked with water and fire, his glorification of the saints in every generation, then the doctrine of the Lord's incarnation, passion, resurrection, and ascension. But then, said Lundy, there was reserve as to imparting even to the catechumens all the mysteries of the Christian faith. In other words, there was an esoteric and an exoteric doctrine. Origen thus states states it in his reply to Cellius and to the disciplined Arcanian. Quote, since he frequently called the Christian doctrine a secret system, we must confute him on the point also, since almost the entire world is better acquainted with what Christians preach than with the the favorite opinion of philosophers. For who is ignorant of the statement that Jesus was born of a virgin, that he was crucified, and that his resurrection is an article of faith, and that a general judgment is announced to come, which the wicked are to be punished according to their desires, as to say, and their righteousness to be daily rewarded. And yet the mystery of the resurrection not being understood is made a subject of ridicule among unbelievers. In these circumstances, to speak of a Christian doctrine as a secret system is altogether absurd. End quote. Here is Tertullian taunting the pagans with their flagrant violation of the esoteric practice and boasting of the Christian adherence to it. And here is a greater than Tertullian, the most learned Origen, shouting that it is absurd to regard the Christian system as a secret one. This is pretty direct contradiction. Doubtlessly, Origen meant to say that a system which freely taught its deepest knowledge to any qualified student, and that prepared the less intelligent for such qualifications, could not be charged with being a secret cult. But the same claim could just as legitimately be made by the pagan side. Origen has already said that esotericism was by no means a peculiarity of Christianity alone, but was a practice of the other spiritual cults of the time. Our effort here is to show that Christianity did, in the early days of its existence, continue the heathen practices of esoteric instruction, but failed to perpetrate it in all too short a time. In a sentence a bit further on, Origin clarifies his position somewhat. He says, quote, moreover, all the mysteries that are celebrated everywhere throughout Greece and barbarous countries, although held in secret, have no discredit thrown upon them, so that it is in vain that he, Cellus, endeavors to calculate the secret doctrine of Christianity, seeing he does not correctly understand its nature. It's from Contra Cesium, Book 1, C7. Here's the great patristic defending the very thing that 1,000 Christian protagonists have reprobated and depreciated as a practice in the mystery brotherhood and the religion of the pagans. This could be the reason why the Christian historians are so loath to admit the fact that their religion began with the same intent to distinguish between grades of intelligence in their following and to impart to the more capable what it is was deemed injurious and impolite to cast broadly out to the rabble. There can eventually only good from bringing the Christian system to book on this flagrant item of its inconsistency and logic insincerely. Surely the one and only true religion will not wish to compound and perpetrate a obvious subterfuge. Much reliance can be placed on von Mosheim, that is von Mosheim, M-O-S-H, or Mosheim, I should say, study conclusions, at least on their sincerity. He says in his book here, History of the Christian Religion, Book 1, 19, note that the Christians adopted, in common with the pagan nations, the plan of dividing their sacred offices in two classes, one being public, to which every person was freely admitted, the other secret or mysterious, from which all the unprofessed were excluded. The initiative was those who had been baptized, the unprofessed, and the catechumens. The mode of preparatory examination also bore a strong resemblance in many aspects, or respects, I should say, to the course of initiated forms observed by the heathen nations in regard to their mysteries. Quote, in a word, many forms and ceremonies to pass over other things of the Christian worship were evidently copied from their secret rites of paganism. And we have only to lament that what was just done with unquestionably the best of intentions should in some respect have been attended with an evil result, end quote. Without end, the volificarians of Christianity, all supreme excellence, have ignorant or made light of the reverence paid generally by the ancient world to the esoteric polity. This is disingenuous from the historical standpoint, since every historian knows that Christianity started out to practice and perpetrate the esoteric order of religion impartation. When it is known that the young movement so soon dropped the more cautious and secret handling of what was held to be reconciled precious truth, and so to say, flung wide open the doors to all and sundry to enter the most sacred holy of holies of mystical knowledge, without furnishing credentials of mental competence or spiritual qualifications, the apologist for the faith is confronted with the task of excusing the change and mitigating its challenging implications as best he may. What is needed, however, is that it be explained and honestly accounted for. The difficulty of doing this without making damaging omissions which convict the early church of being swayed by the forces of ignorance has so far deterred the writers from a frank facing of the true situation. Within little more than a century after Origen had charged the esoteric pagans with admitting indiscriminately the low and ignorant as well as the high and intelligent into their association, and boasting of the Christian practice of careful segregation of its devotees into graded classes, it was the Christian church that took the fatal plunge irrevocably into the very practice and has held to it unremittingly ever since. Indeed, the fact has become one of the very proudest boasts of the church, which heralds abroad at all times its vast humanitarian beneficence in ministering to all grades of human intelligence without let or bar to the meanest. One more excerpt from Higgins' wonderful old Anna Calipus, that's AnacalYpisi, rightfully belongs here to help round out this picture in page 647. Quote, it cannot be doubted that all the explanations pretended to be made of the esoteric religion by Jerome and the early fathers are mere fables to deceive the vulgar. How absurd to suppose that when these men who were at the head of the religion were admitting that there was a secret religion for the initiative, only they would explain it to all the world. Their explanations to the vulgar are suitable to the vulgar and were meant merely to stop their inquiries. In other words, they wanted to hush them up, keep them, you got too many questions here. We're not going to answer those questions more, just to make you happy and think about this. This is something good. Da, 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 da. And they were like, oh, that's great, great. And just took it. Here indeed that's the end quote, sorry. Here indeed is stern confrontation of a proud and boastful religion with the long suppressed and unwelcome truth. Higgins' strong charge can be shouted down with loud denials, but it can hardly be proven incorrect. The Father's own admissions hold it up as true. In this passage, Higgins states in his few words the whole prime case of the Christian religion, its rise and spread and failure. It is all condensed in its charge that while the Fathers confessed and for close to 200 years upheld the existence of an inner profundity, a meaning, and high range of mystical experience that could only legitimately be imparted to initiatives and genuinely tested and accredited competence, they were at the same time spreading the forms of those inner teachings abroad to the general populace and in the process reducing the rich and something as feasts of wisdom to such hash and portents as the ignorant masses could find in some way digestible. Thus came Christianism. See, ISM is just it's not Christian. You see, it's a power base, so to speak. It's a faith, so to speak. You see, it's become a political deal, which was the wreckage of Christianity. So the Christianism with the ISM is like communism, you see, which was the wreckage of, that's how I'm seeing it here. People don't understand, and this is all new to me in some ways too. So I'm learning as I do this. What this meant in concrete result for the vulgar can be seen only too clearly in a statement out of Gibbon's Great Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, page 502. Quote, the most extravagant legends as they concluded to the honor of the church were apprehended by the credulous multitude, countenanced by the power of the clergy, and attested by the suspicious evidence of ecclesiastical history. End quote. The church may be made with good reason appalled the axiomatic expression that it is necessary to make human life appear thrillingly romantic, or it itself managed to the introductions of any amount of romantic wonder lore into the actual history of the faith. Indeed, converted a mass of romantic legends into actual history. It is presumably a function and prerogative of religion to infuse into the drab texture of ordinary life the more seductive hue of romantic allure, but it is expected to be achieved through the channels of revelation of the actual wonder of life in its own overt factuality, the mission of philosophy, and not by the sheer fabrication of fictitious stories. More than one writer comments on the demoralization effect of the presentation of the comedies, that is, the memes and the mythology scenarios, even the pictures and statues, which failing entirely to carry to the low populace their pure and higher esoteric connotation they had, said Fisher, the beginning of Christianity in page 212, end quote. Another quote by him, the most corrupting effect upon the morals of women and of youth. And I'm gonna end that right now. Holding off of this. We're gonna do another. We're gonna do this a little later. I need a break. So the conclusion here simply is from The beginnings of, from Fisher saying again, the beginnings of Christianity, page 2 of 12. He quotes here, the most corrupting effect upon the morals of women and of youth, end quote. And at that point, I'm going to stop, and because it's almost an hour long, and take a break. Okay. Thank you for being here. We'll talk to you soon.